Have you ever wondered where phobias come from? Are we born with our fears, or are they learned? In the early 20th century, one psychologist set out to answer this very question, but the way he did it would ignite a debate that continues to this day. This is the story of a controversial experiment, a 9-month-old baby, and a little white rat. This is the true story of little Albert. Our story begins in 1920 at Johns Hopkins University. The world of psychology was buzzing with new ideas, chief among them a school of thought called behaviorism. Behaviorists believed that all behaviors, even complex emotions like fear, love, and hate, were simply responses to environmental stimuli. They argued that human beings were essentially blank slates, and our experiences write the script of who we become. The leading voice of this movement was a charismatic and ambitious psychologist named John B. Watson. Watson was convinced that he could take any healthy infant, and by controlling their environment shape them into any type of specialist he chose: a doctor, a lawyer, an artist, even a beggar or a thief, regardless of their talents or ancestry. It was a bold claim, and he needed a bold experiment to prove it. Enter our subject, known to history only as Little Albert. He was a 9-month-old infant, described in the study as healthy, stable, and relatively unemotional. In fact, he almost never cried. Watson and his research assistant, Rosalie Rayner, began by testing Albert's baseline reactions to a variety of objects. They showed him a white rat, a rabbit, a dog, a monkey, masks with and without hair, cotton wool, and burning newspapers. Albert showed no fear. He was curious, even reaching out to touch the animals. He was, in Watson's words, a stolid and unemotional child, the perfect blank slate. But there was one thing that did scare Albert. The researchers discovered that if they struck a steel bar with a hammer just behind his head, the loud, jarring sound would make him jump, burst into tears, and show every sign of fear. This was what behaviorists call an unconditioned response, an innate, automatic reaction. The loud noise was the unconditioned stimulus. Watson now had his tools. He had an object Albert didn't fear, the white rat, and a sound that he did. The experiment could now begin in earnest. 2 months later, when Albert was about 11 months old, the conditioning phase started. They presented the white rat to Albert. As his hand reached out to touch the furry creature, one of the researchers struck the steel bar behind him. Bang! Albert jumped violently, fell forward, and whimpered. A week later, they repeated the process. They showed him the rat again. This time he was more hesitant, but he still reached for it. And again, bang! The loud, frightening noise. This time Albert began to cry. They repeated this pairing of the rat and the noise several more times. The effect was dramatic and swift. Soon, the mere sight of the white rat was enough to make Albert cry and desperately try to crawl away. He didn't even have to hear the noise anymore. He had learned to associate the rat with the terrifying sound. The rat, which was once a neutral object, had become a conditioned stimulus, capable of producing a conditioned response: fear. Watson and Rayner had successfully conditioned a phobia in a human child, but their investigation didn't stop there. They wanted to see if this newly created fear would transfer to other, similar objects. This concept is known as generalization. 5 days later, they tested Albert again. They presented him with a series of objects he had never seen before. First, a white rabbit. The moment he saw it, Albert began to cry, turning away and moving as far as he could. Then, a dog. The same reaction, a sealskin fur coat. He cried and crawled away. Even a Santa Claus mask with its white cotton ball beard caused him to cry and turn his head. It was clear. Albert's fear had generalized. He wasn't just afraid of the white rat. He was afraid of a whole range of furry white objects. He had developed a broad phobia from a single, specific, conditioned experience. For Watson, this was a monumental success. He believed he had demonstrated that emotions were not mysterious, internal states, but learned behaviors that could be systematically conditioned and controlled. He had shown, in his view, how phobias could develop in everyday life. A child bitten by a dog might develop a fear of all dogs. A person in a car accident might develop a fear of driving. The implications were huge. Watson and Rayner had intended to continue the experiment. Their next planned phase was to try and decondition Albert's fear. They theorized they could reverse the process, perhaps by pairing the white rat with something pleasant, like candy, or by gradually reintroducing the feared objects from a distance. This process, known today as systematic desensitization, is a cornerstone of modern therapy for phobias and anxiety disorders. But they never got the chance. Shortly after the generalization tests, little Albert and his mother left the hospital. He was adopted, and his trail went cold. The experiment ended abruptly, leaving its most important ethical question unanswered. Watson and Rayner had successfully induced a phobia in a child, a fear that had spread to numerous other objects, and then they just let him go. He was never desensitized. He was sent out into the world, just over a year old, with a set of fears he never had before. This is where the story of little Albert becomes a landmark case, not just in psychology, but in the ethics of scientific research. Today, an experiment like this would be unthinkable. Modern research ethics, codified in documents like the Belmont Report, require that studies minimize harm, maximize benefits, and ensure the voluntary and informed consent of participants. You cannot simply experiment on a baby, induce psychological distress, and then fail to resolve it. The well-being of the participant is paramount. Watson's study violated these principles in almost every way. For decades, the true identity of little Albert remained a mystery, adding to the legend of the experiment. Psychologists and historians searched for him, wanting to know what became of the boy who was taught to be afraid. Did these fears persist into his adult life? Did he grow up with an unexplainable aversion to dogs, fur coats, or Santa Claus? In 2009, a team of researchers led by psychologist Hall P. Beck believed they had found him. After a 7-year search, they identified a man named Douglas Merritt. Douglas's mother had worked at the same hospital where the experiment took place, and his age and physical characteristics matched the descriptions of little Albert. Tragically, Douglas had passed away in 1925 at the age of 6 from hydrocephalus, a buildup of fluid in the brain. He had been a sickly child for much of his short life. If Douglas was indeed little Albert, he never had the chance to outgrow his conditioned fears. This discovery added another layer of ethical complexity to the study. Some have argued that if Albert was not the healthy infant Watson described, but was in fact already suffering from a neurological condition, it makes the experiment even more problematic. Did his underlying health issues make him more susceptible to the conditioning? Was he truly a blank slate? The story of little Albert is a powerful and unsettling cautionary tale. It stands as a stark reminder of a time when the quest for scientific knowledge sometimes overshadowed basic human compassion. While Watson's work on behaviorism undeniably shaped the course of psychology, leading to effective therapies we use today, the methods he used in this case are a lesson in what not to do. The experiment forces us to ask difficult questions. What is the price of knowledge? Where do we draw the line between scientific inquiry and the well-being of a human subject? The legacy of little Albert is not just about conditioned fear. It's about the responsibility that comes with power, especially the power to shape a young and developing mind. It's a story that, a century later, still has the power to make us feel uneasy, and for very good reason. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into one of psychology's most famous and controversial studies. What do you think? Was Watson a pioneer pushing the boundaries of science, or did he go too far? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this story fascinating, please hit that like button and subscribe for more true stories from the history of science. Thanks for watching.